You landed on The Substance, a podcast aimed at being biblical, thoughtful, and human. Join us each week as we engage the culture without the culture war. I'm your host, Philip Marinello, joined by my friends and co-hosts here, Trevor Aiken.
Howdy.
And Vincent Edwards.
What's going on?
And I'll just jump right into it. And our special guest today, That Makes Total Sense! Podcast host, Alexis Busetti.
What's up, guys?
What's going on?
What is up?
So how we feeling, everybody?
Well, yeah, Philip was just like, "Hey, what guest do we have on tonight? We should totally have Alexis on, right?" And we were like, "Yeah, that totally makes sense."
Nice
Right.
work.
Yeah.
Trevor with the slam dunk dad joke.
I love it. I live with a dad who has dad jokes like continually all the time. And it's the problem is that our youngest is 7 now. And that's like his prime time audience. And so
Yeah.
I'm like, when he ages out, like, I don't know what we're going to do in life for an audience. We're going to have to find other
You're just going to send him to a comedy school, huh?
And then your kid starts repeating the dad jokes.
Oh, that's
Like,
already
you're like,
happened, man.
Yeah.
That's like story of my life. Yeah.
So then you get
Right.
all the remixes and everything.
Yes.
Do you have any that like genuinely make you laugh?
No, not anymore, probably.
Like the same 6 or 7 just on rotation?
I mean, pretty much. But, it's like really, really sophisticated humor, like, the Bean song at dinner.
There you go.
And, I mean, things like this, right? So
High quality. Hey,
Yeah,
7-year-old.
for
I
sure.
mean, if you said your youngest is a boy,
Yes.
I think he'll find that funny for many years to come, if we're being
Of
honest.
course. Yes, of course. There's no lack of that kind of humor at our house.
So, Alexis, for those that maybe don't know, tell some of the folks in the audience like who you are, what you do. Tell them a little bit about the podcast.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's how we met, right? I mean, we haven't like real met, but that's how we met.
I think I was doing research on a guest and just listened to your episode and started following
nice.
you. I think that's what happened.
Nice. That's
Yes.
awesome. Yeah. I can't remember. I think we showed up. We just like showed up in each other's feed one day and I was like, man, these guys are cool. Yeah. So, I mean, that's how we met, but this is like, my kind of hobby that was never intended to, I don't know, to be, I guess. So I do host a podcast called That Makes Total Sense, where we explore God's generosity and justice. That's kind of our tagline. My husband edits it and produces it, and he is amazing. When I speak with my guests, I tell them that up front, and then there are often times during the show, where I'll stop and I'll say, "Okay, Seth, I'm going to need you to like, break all of this up right here," or like
For
I
sure.
say something stupid, or like the dog barks, or something, and I'm like, "Okay," so I'll tell them like, "I don't think your name is Seth, but sometimes I may talk to like my imaginary husband who's off at work or whatever." So yeah, so I mean, I'm a wife, I'm a mom. We live in Houston. We have 4 kids. I part-time homeschool 2 of them now. It used to be 3.
Wow.
Now I just part-time homeschool my daughters. And then I went back to school last year, which is like stupid and crazy and totally fun. It's like the most fun thing I do in life right now. So yeah, so that's kind of who I am and what I'm doing right now.
That's awesome.
So I'm curious, Alexis, you're at over 110 episodes here with That Makes Total Sense. One of the things that I was curious about, as far as like goals when you started versus maybe how they've evolved over 110 plus episodes, why did you start it and like what keeps you going on it?
Yeah, no, that's great. So I never like wanted to do a podcast, like I listened to a lot and, but it was never just one of those things like, oh yeah, I'm totally going to do that. But it actually started. So before we started recording, I was telling you guys about a friend of mine who, we were talking about seminary and apologetics and all that. And anyway, she and her husband were over for dinner a couple of years ago now, I can say that. And at the time I was doing a little bit of like kind of part-time personal finance coaching, just kind of like getting my feet back wet in the water of work, after I'd been staying home with my kids for, at that point, it was like 7 years full time. I'd stayed home with my kids and I had done a couple of podcast interviews just kind of surrounding that. And my girlfriend says, okay, this was crazy. I haven't like really shared this like out, but here we go. So she was like, okay, here's the thing. I don't care anything about personal finance.
Mhm.
And I don't listen to podcasts, but I just sat and listened to you talk about money for 30 minutes on a podcast. So I feel like I've asked you this before, and I'm going to ask you again. Why do you not have a podcast? And I was kind of like, I don't know what the crap you're talking about. Like, it was like one of these, like, what? And then like the whole evening, I mean, we had dinner by that point and dessert and all, and it just kind of pivoted to where we were like, wait a minute, what? Like, are we actually having this conversation? And, we talked about it that night with them, with our good friends. We prayed about it. And then we just kind of kept the conversation going after they left. And from my end, it was kind of like, oh my goodness, I think I could totally do that. I'm like, I just really, I enjoy having good conversation, right? Like, I think I'm like kind of decent at communicating. Like, I think I could probably do that. And then at the same time, my husband was like, hey, if we think we want to give it a shot, we have like everything we need, like he's a musician, not by trade, but he's a really good, amateur musician. And he's a gear junkie. So like we have all the stuff, right?
Yes, mic and a board and a computer, then you can have a podcast.
I mean, we had kind of all the stuff. And so, so at the beginning it was more, I knew at that point, I know it sounds odd. At that point, even though I was doing some of that personal finance stuff, I knew that wasn't just going to be my bread and butter. My first master's is in organizational studies and social justice. And so that was kind of where my heart had always been. But that was where I was at the moment. And so everyone was like, oh, that makes total sense. Are you going to do it like CENTS? And I was like, no, because I don't want to like, first of all, no. But second of all, like, I don't want to like put myself in that box, right? I'm like, I don't want to just talk about money. I want to be able to talk about a lot of other things. And so we did have a few episodes where I did talk about money, but mostly it was not. It was just kind of like, what's interesting. I grew up in kind of a background where religiously, my tradition was a lot more about kind of having all the right answers. And I was realizing that wasn't like kind of working for me anymore. So I just kind of had this little, shift in my paradigm of like, what if I just kind of learned how to ask better questions? Like what would that look like on the ground for me? And what if this podcast would be a place where we kind of encouraged people to start asking good questions, instead of being super concerned about having like, all the right answers or whatever. So.
Yeah, you're over 100 episodes at this point of the recording, and you've had some pretty notable people, I would say, in Christendom. Justin Gibney, you've had Jamar Tisby, Vince
Had a
Bantu,
boy show.
Show Baraka.
Yes. Followed you guys up on show, yeah.
And so I guess the question that stems from that is like, what's some like gems of information that you've learned from having so many great guests?
Good night. That's a really good one. So, I mean, we were kind of chatting about it before, and Philip, you were kind of asking about it. Like, I do happen to have a lot of authors on.
You're a reading machine.
Yeah,
I see
for
your
sure.
post where you're like, just finished another book in a week to talk to somebody. It's like, good night.
Like, well, I mean, that's part of it is like a lot of the learning, Vincent, is coming from the conversations for sure. But I am kind of one of these where I'm like, I'm like still a little bit like insecure, right? I mean, 100 episodes in for sure, I get like nervous every time I sign on and stuff like that. And I'm like, I just need to know enough, again, to be able to ask an intelligent question, right? And so a lot of what I say I've learned has come from the reading beforehand. But then it's just like invaluable to be able to process that information with the person who wrote it, right?
Sure.
So, you mentioned Justin Gibney, and like from the podcast that I did with him, we started talking about Fannie Lou Hamer, and I had just studied her for one of my classes, and he just got really emotional when we were talking about her. And so, kind of one of those gems from that conversation was just like, this is not an intellectual only discussion, right? When we're talking about politics, it's not just about facts or statistics or anything like this, right? I mean, for all of us, I recognize that it's emotional, but there's emotion there, there's history there, there's tradition there, there's roots, in us. Who are we looking back at and saying, I want to do it like she did it, right? And kind of who are we trying to be formed, into, that we can move forward, with whatever it is that we're working on, whatever we feel called to. So that was an example from Justin's episode. But, I think about, I had Sarah Jackson on from Casa de Paz in Colorado, and they run a house where they take in people who are inside of the immigration system. And reading her book was like one of the most eye-opening experiences that I had had. And I just kind of realized, I was just kind of in an uninformed way, not necessarily registering what I was doing. I was just kind of like walking a party line almost when it came to that discussion and that topic. And reading her book, with stories about real people and kind of how some of her views had formed and changed. And then being able to process that with her online. And like you guys talked about before we started recording, that's kind of the cool thing about what we do, is we get to do some of that during the recording, but then we get to do some of it, a lot of times off air too, where we get to be a little bit, candid and stuff like that. And they're, my guests, I'm sure you guys feel the same way. They're just so generous with their time and with what they offer us. And so I'm so thankful.
Yeah.
Alexis, I just scrolled back through all of our Instagram DMs. The very first place we connected was when I won the Liturgy of Politics when you had Caitlin on. I listened to your Caitlin show and I won the book from you.
That's awesome.
That's what it was.
I mean, because you guys had Caitlin too on the show.
Liturgy of Politics. It's a simple book. I think it's one of my
really
best
good.
reads of the year.
Yes,
and
agreed.
Maybe one of the first books I would hand a Christian who is genuinely trying to kind of parse through the not party line, wanting to care about people and care about God. She's a really incredible voice. It was a genuinely wonderful book. Like that's the kind of book that could be very, like it could easily go into like cliches or kind of pander or just kind of like be more emotional and like, oh, we need justice and the traditional da-da-da is falling short on these things. But like it was simple in a way. It was just very, very impactful and on point. Like and the way she handled it too, I could see, I mean, the Holy Spirit can do anything, but just the way she approached it and the way it was packaged and the structure and the format of it, like I could really see that changing hearts and minds.
Yeah.
Oh, I agree 100%. That book was definitely one of my number one reads also. In fact, my copy is loaned out right now. I think I ended up with 2, and they may both be gone at this point.
Nice.
Yeah. And my dad, he's a journalist, but his graduate degree is in political science. And I was like, you have to, like, I'm requiring that you read this book, right?
Right.
It was so incredible. I think Michael Ware wrote the foreword of that. And he said something like, you can imagine that your church has basically hired someone to think about this, right? To think about this, to research it, and to come back and give you a report, right? And this book is that report. He says something, this book is a gift to the church. And I just think about that because I love the way that she thinks about things and then how she's able to communicate it. Yeah, I completely agree. That was one of my best reads too.
Thanks for the opportunity for winning that book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Caitlin and your IVP rep, that was good.
Yeah. That's amazing.
One of the things, I've listened to a number of your shows and I've enjoyed all the ones I've listened to. I know you read the books. Do you have like go-to questions specifically, or do you try to tailor things to each person? How do you kind of approach that?
Yeah, I don't.
Nice.
I don't have go-to questions. What I have learned, and I've had some authors, because like you guys did, we had some pre-recording talk, right? And there's always a little bit of that. And so I usually ask my guests, like, what would be a win for them? At the end of this conversation, like, what would be a win for you? And what I'm learning is that many of them are saying a genuine conversation, right? They just want to be able to have a really, really just kind of, heart to heart, good, genuine conversation. And many of them will say, they want to hit what hit me, which is kind of cool, right? So they want to be able to hit on the topics that stood out to me when I read the book, or they want to be able to, see what touched me or what impacted me, and then kind of go from there. And that feeds into the first thing, right? That makes them for kind of a more genuine conversation, because I'm actually able to respond, to what impacted me in the book. And sometimes I will have guests that will specifically ask for questions ahead of time. But in that case, even still, I just kind of go through and I try and, I do try and tailor it. I try and tailor it to just like what stood out to me. What's the point I think they're trying to make? High level, not summary type stuff, but what's the overarching, thesis, and see if we can focus on that. But
Yeah.
I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
It's a good one.
I wanted to just ask a particular question. The tagline in your podcast, it's talking about generosity and justice. God's exploring God's generosity and justice. And I think, privy to what we've seen recently in the last few years, several years, those two things kind of seem juxtaposed or against each other. And so how did you kind of come up with this idea that I want to merge those two and kind of display that in a way where they don't have to fight each other?
Man, you guys pay him the big bucks, don't you?
Yeah.
These are like the good,
a
solid.
large percentage of the payroll that we pay out to everyone goes
That's
to
true.
events.
You could say he gets the 100%.
It's kind of like when we used to, when I was
Check.
exclusively staying home, right? I would like, look at what I did, like I was so proud of something I'd accomplished or something, and my husband would come home and he'd be like, 50% raise. I'm like, well, 50% of zero is
Still
you got
zero.
to do the math.
Still zero.
Still zero. So I mean, part of that, and in all honesty, so we changed. So you talked about pivot or something earlier. I think, Philip, maybe you were asking that earlier, kind of how has this evolved a little bit. So the truth is, Vincent, that tagline came in part as I was trying to transition the subject matter of the podcast. Because, we had started off kind of talking about money and finances a little bit, or at least leaving the opening for that to be in existence. And I say that, but the first several episodes really didn't have anything to do with it. We only had a few, but I kind of wanted to, use that as a little bit of a transition, because that was something that I was learning at the time, when I was saying how I kind of grew up in a tradition that was really focused on having the right answers. For me, some of what that translated to was a bit of a scarcity mindset, not just with money, but just with God's goodness, right? Man, there's kind of only so much of whatever it is that God is pouring out or that exists. And a scarcity mindset can be really damaging to our relationship with the Lord, I think. When we think that there's only so much that he's willing to give, or only so much that he's able to give, I think that can be really damaging. And not everyone struggles with that, but I think that I realized that was probably at the root of some of my kind of faith struggles, was thinking through that. And so that's the generosity, portion in part was God is a giver. And so how can we, as image bearers, how can we explore that so that we can also be givers and we can be generous with ourselves? But then the justice part of it, right? I started doing a lot of interviews in 2020 where I was like, we're just going to talk about this. And I reached out to some people that I thought, I'll just give it a shot. Right? I don't know if they'll come on, but I'll give it a shot. Malcolm Foley was one of those guys, now the Reverend Dr. Malcolm Foley, as of a few days ago. And he was so gracious to come on the show. And and Jamar came on, and Daniel Hill
I
came
say you
on.
had
And
Daniel Hill. He was a
did.
great guy to talk to. We really
Mhm.
enjoyed that.
Right. He was incredible. But yeah, just kind of had some of these guys on that were having the conversations. They had been having these conversations, right, for years and years. And I thought, man, if I can jump in, I'd love to, talk to them about this. And there's a justice side to God too, right? Like you said. But I don't think that those two parts of God are meant to be entirely juxtaposed.
Not at all.
Mhm.
It feels like it. It feels like it sometimes, but I don't think that it is. I think that the justice face of God that we see is his generosity.
So
Mhm.
the justice part, Alexis, I got two different kind of questions. You can kind of pick how you want to answer them. But okay, the two types of people I have in mind. One is, so a lot of our listeners are on board kind of with like, God is a God of justice. This matters to him. Maybe for those people who maybe are lacking in just awareness and understanding things like that, what's a good place to start for them? And then I know we also have listeners who are maybe say like open but very cautious. Like, what are some good starting points? Like you said, you've had a lot of people on, a lot of them have books and lecture series and other good resources. What are some good places maybe for those different types of listeners to start? Or kind of throw a third one in there to spice it up, for maybe our friends and family who maybe we want to kind of help nurture
Mhm.
along in some of these conversations. What are some good places for those various sorts of people to start with?
Yeah. So I just want to say, like, I appreciate the question and I recognize that this is a thing, right? It's an easier conversation for me to have, in part because of my education. My master's degree had a very large social justice aspect. And so I've been having those conversations for a long time. And so, in part, I recognize that while some of this is familiar to me, it's totally not to everybody.
Mhm.
So I do recognize that and say that's totally a thing.
A lot of people are coming at it from like with suspicion just because of
Absolutely.
the I'm trying not to use the word tribalism as much now, but just the environments that people are raised in and are coming from. They're kind of taught to be suspicious of these things.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I was working on a project years ago. This is probably 3 or 4 years ago, I guess, at this point. So pre-podcast, pre-2020, any of this stuff. And I ended up, through kind of a series of contacts, getting in touch with a retired pastor from a mainline denom, actually, here in Houston, but of a large church. And so we were having this conversation, and I was talking with him about my project that we had been connected about. And in the subtitle of this project, I just had the words social justice. And we're on the phone, and he says, "Look, if you want basically anybody in the white evangelical space to even look at this project, you're going to have to take that out. Like
Wow.
it's going to be a non-starter."
Dang.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was kind of like, thank you, no. Right. I mean, at that point, because I've always kind of pushed back, in this space. So, I mean, I think part of it is that there's suspicion. But I think a starting place. So I kind of have two books in mind. So since you kind of asked about that, one is one that I did, one of my first author interviews that I did early in the podcast. The author's name is Jean Bishop, and she wrote a book. Actually, she's written two, but we spoke we spoke about one of them, and I ended up reading both of them. But the second one, the one that we talked about, was actually about Tim McVeigh's father. Tim McVeigh was the bomber in the Oklahoma City Muros building bombing that happened in the 90s in Oklahoma City. And I was living in Oklahoma at the time. I was in middle school. And so I remember this, well. And it was about Tim McVeigh's dad and the father of one of the victims of the bombing, and how they had reconciled. These two fathers had. And Jean has another story that is a personal story of hers that her other book is about. And that is that her sister and brother-in-law and their unborn baby were murdered.
Dang.
And she tells the story of how she deals with that. But specifically in this book, she speaks of how she deals with the convicted murderer. And she's had interaction with him. And so when I think about a good starting place for justice, I think about how, to the best that we can, how can we envision that God views justice? I think that he is always in the business of redemption and restoration. And so sometimes I think that we get suspicious of justice because it feels combative. We have to get someone who has done something and make sure someone pays for something, and you can kind of go down that road until you don't feel comfortable anymore. Or we can think about this in terms of, yes, God is righteous and he is holy, and he is in the business of redemption, which doesn't mean that we don't recognize hurts, right? I think we do recognize hurts, but that's what redemption is. It's a recognition of some wounding that's happened, right? And then it's allowing God to repair and restore what has gone wrong. So that's one place that I would start.
Is that Grace from the Rubble? Was that it?
Grace from the Rubble. Yes, that was the book that we, and then I think in the link to that, I have I don't remember the name of the other book, but something about a heart, I feel
We'll
like.
put it in the show notes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, she has another book out that's great, the one about the murderer. But if people are looking at more kind of a systemic starting place, I would say Dominic Gilliard's first book. It's about the prison system.
I was just listening to that episode recently.
Yeah. So, but that's a really good one because he talks about that kind of restorative justice as opposed to a retributive justice, and looking at it from a biblical perspective, and then also addressing
rethinking incarceration.
Thank you, Philip. Yeah. On the ground, what could that look like even systemically, right? And why are we in the place we are systemically now? He kind of goes through a lot of the history. But then thinking about it as a Christian, what could we look toward? Last one, reparations. Duke Kwon and Gregory Thompson is also a fantastic perspective, I think, on justice. Duke Kwon and Gregory Thompson, I had Duke Kwon on the show, and they talk about this really from the perspective of, as a believer, if you know that someone has been stolen from or someone has been hurt, what should our response be? And so they don't really go into the practical part at all. It's really just making the biblical argument. Now, they're specifically doing it in the context of making a biblical argument for reparations when it's, regarding the racial situation in America. But it is an overarching argument that can be used, biblically. How should we respond as Christians? Where should our heart be when it comes to seeing that someone has been wounded or stolen from? What should our response be?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Just some great perspectives and great conversations and everything to highlight. I wanted to go back to what you had said earlier about kind of transitions, and you were talking about the subtitle of the show, because I can hear, like, underneath that, it sounds like there's a lot of personal transition from a way of thinking, from a background, from a community. And I know that, like, when you think those thoughts, sometimes that there's cost to that as well. And so I wonder if you'd be willing to talk a little bit about, like, that journey. Like, what was maybe some of the time, like, how long ago was that you feel like you started on that journey? What were some of the first things that you think were some inflection points on that? And what was the cost, in the real world for you along the way, as you've kind of explored these ideas and maybe try to put some of that in practice personally?
Yeah. I won't like tell my life story here, but I will go back just a little bit, because for me, it's kind of almost a full circle. That's kind of the feeling that I have. So, I've talked about my background just a little bit. I heard, I think it was David French. I was listening to the Holy Post. They had French Friday, and
Love that.
he used
Jealous, man. They can just call up David French every other week and be like, "Hey, it's Friday. Come on our show."
it was great. It
Here's
was
some
great.
ukulele. Listen to it.
Yeah, we just can get like, clever titles. Be like, "Hey, really brilliant, famous, busy person. Come on our show."
Right, and then they had it. And then they had a song, right? I mean, part of it anyway. It was great.
Yeah.
So I was listening to the most recent French Friday. I don't know. Maybe it was the first one. I don't know. But it's David French was on, and he used he said probably what I would say of my upbringing. We didn't call it fundamentalism, but it was totally fundamentalism. He called it like
100%.
right?
Yeah.
He called it like neo fundamentalism, right?
Trevor, can you relate?
We used to joke about, putting the fun back in fundamentalism.
That was our church. Yeah.
Yes. No, my church took the fun out of fundamentalism. Okay. So this was kind of where I grew up. But I don't even know. I was in this like AP English class, right, in high school. And we were writing position papers. And one of the things that we could do for our sources was do an interview. And so I did an interview with my pastor. And I was doing a position paper on the death penalty.
Nice.
And I was against, spoiler alert.
Oh, interesting. Was that because you were like personally that position, or was that just the position you took to write the paper?
Yeah, I was personally that position.
Okay.
Yeah, I was personally that position. So I went and had this interview, and this, now I understand the naivety there, I feel like is understandable because I was a teenager, right? So I walk into his office, right? And of course, like I had been there, I'd been at church, right? So I knew, but we didn't talk about stuff like that. Like no one talked about it from the pulpit. We're not talking about this in Sunday school class or whatever.
Yeah.
So in my naivety, I walk in thinking, I can't wait for him to just completely defend my position. Yeah. Like he's completely supporting my position. You know why? Because he loves Jesus. So he's completely supporting my position. Yeah. He did not support my position. Like at all. Yeah. Like at all. And it got like a little heated. Now, of course, I was a 15-year-old girl. So yeah, I mean, like,
like Alexis, we need to kill these people.
It was crazy. And I left and I thought, wow, that did not go well. It was not what I anticipated.
Yeah.
But things like that, this is the bad thing. This is why I would say it's kind of circular. Things like that kept happening to me, right? Or I kept pushing. But every time, whether I was 15 or 25, I walked in with the naivety that whoever I was speaking with was going to share, at least closely, kind of, somewhere in the realm of my position.
They'll be supportive.
Of course, because they love Jesus, and I'm kind of using that facetiously, but really, so I went, one of my first jobs out of college was doing state casework. Right.
Wow.
So I'm like, this place, this office, it's a state office. It's going to be swarming with Christians because we are defending the poor and needy and the vulnerable of our society. And no, it was not swarming with Christians. Again, spoiler alert. It just wasn't. And not only was this fine, they got better paying jobs, but I was surprised at the pushback though. Right. So it's not that just the place wasn't swarming with Christians. It was kind of like, and I wasn't working in the welfare system, but my colleagues were working like with TANF and stuff like that. Right. I was doing child protective services, which is kind of its own beast. But it was you're hearing things about how, we shouldn't be helping these people and, blah, 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 and this drain on the system and yada, yada. And I'm kind of like, whoa, this feels like
the
not what I'm reading.
Kind of stuff.
Yeah, this feels like not what I'm reading in the Bible. So anyway, so things like that kind of kept happening to me. And then I go and I get my master's and think again, kind of still I'm having these. And then I land in white evangelicalism. And my views didn't change, but we also just didn't talk about it. I'm mixed. I'm Hispanic and white. And I have, of course, had experiences of brown, marginalized people in America. But then I married a white guy, and
With a
he
good
didn't really have
Italian name, though.
with a good Italian name. So yes, so I look, kind of generically ethnic, and so people, sometimes would guess that I'm Italian or whatever. But he grew up in a white community, pretty homogenous, and he had really no context for a lot of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I married this white guy from a largely white community. We're steeped now in white evangelicalism, and so I mean, I think you're right, Trevor. I think you were the one who asked the question. So, and then when Ahmaud Arbery was who got me in 2020. And I'm embarrassed to say that it wasn't anyone else before that. In part, I wasn't keeping up with the news. That was the main thing. I wasn't keeping up in the news. And like other people have mentioned, like Christians of color are mentioning, everyone before this, Michael Brown was not mentioned from the pulpit, right? Freddie Gray, not mentioned from no one's
Or
mentioned
not
from the
mentioned
pulpit.
positively if they have been.
Sure, right.
Right.
And so I'm not keeping up with the news. This isn't happening in my church community. And Ahmaud Arbery, I mean, we're all of us, right? It's 2020. That's all we can do is be on our phones and be in the news, right? We're stuck at home,
Right.
And one of my girlfriends commented on Instagram, and she just said, "I'm tired. I'm tired," And that started a lot of the deep personal conversations, processing this with my friends, and this same girlfriend of mine, she just said, because we're crying together on the phone, and all this, and we're processing this. And she says, "Lex, there are people," because I'm saying, what can I do? Right? What can I do? And at the time, of course, I already had the podcast. And she said, "I'm sorry to tell you this, but there are some people who are only going to hear this message from someone who looks like you."
It's true.
And I was like, first of all, I don't want you to be right. But I have to listen to you and believe that you're right. And, second of all, that sucks, right? But then it's okay. I can talk about this. I can try and educate myself. I can try and ask good questions. I can try and listen, and I can try and encourage people to do the same thing, And yeah, I mean, I would say, there were a few costs, right? Part of it, I think I was chatting with someone recently, and I'm like, look, I think people are done having this conversation. I think some people are done having this conversation at this point.
Yeah.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah. I think everyone was interested for a few months until they weren't.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fatigue for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah.
So thinking about, I just wanted to point something out, ask a question, kind of hear what you think, Alexis and Trevor and Vince. What I heard you say definitely rings true for me and my upbringing and my church-going experience, barring the last year and a half or so. There is the rhetoric in conservative evangelicalism of like, we need to like be salt and light. We need to be in the world. We need to be in the world. Like vocation was always lifted up as good. It's like, not everybody needs to be a pastor or missionary. Like be a fill in the blank, be a salesperson, be a teacher, be a be people in society, go out and be salt and light. But like, actually, most of the people kind of did live in that bubble. Like you said, Alexis, because of your personal ethnicity and background, you got to see some of these things firsthand. I got to as well. Like I grew up pretty low on the socioeconomic level. So like I just kind of saw things, and I also assumed that like people see these things, but like affluent, middle, upper class people just can kind of live in a bubble and just not realize the injustice going around. So we're called to go out and be salt and light, yet functionally we end up isolating ourselves. Like how do we help people realize that they are actually isolating themselves versus going out and being salt and light? And that's for everybody on the call. What do we think about that?
Okay, so I think there's a couple ways. Like, one, you're asking a church question, right? So we're talking about people in the church. How do we realize? And here's the thing. I think at some level, people do realize it, they just
That
don't know
they're in a
what to
bubble?
do about it. Yeah, because like the old adage is there's
My
a
sigh is with
way.
you, Philip.
The old adage is there's always two things you can talk about from the pulpit and convict people, and that's
Like prayer and
and
evangelism?
prayer and evangelism
Sure.
every time, right? But that's the thing is like if those two things, and especially on the evangelism side, it's because like people know they don't do enough or whatever that is. But
Interesting.
I think
Okay, I
it's
think I
also
see that.
because we have disciplines that we're not discipling our people in, right? So we just have this general, honestly,
But I don't
what
think people
feels like,
realize their ignorance.
well, I think, yeah, well,
I don't
maybe
think so either.
not, but I think if we did it right, they would. Like if we educated correctly on that. What I'm saying is, you could maybe tap into. There is maybe a way to tap into the fundamental underlying dissatisfaction people have with their obedience in that area, which is generally acknowledged to exist. There's got to be some way to tap into that, and then if you could put a positive turn to it, such that you had a, hey, this isn't working, like expecting you to have water cooler conversations with your coworkers that somehow gets them to whatever the plan is, come to church or share their life with you or start talking to you as their counselor or something instead of their therapist, whatever, stuff like that happens. But like if that's the kind of the mindset that people are in, and then it just doesn't happen because everybody's too busy trying to do the best they can, make money and live the comfortable American dream Christian family life, then yeah, they fall short of that goal because it's not really ever pursued in a way that's like connecting with your neighbors, living a holistic life.
I don't think that it's even a goal. And I think it's the identity of the conservative equals this, and that's not
Good
biblically
guys.
defined. It's like politically and socially defined. Like I don't think it's a biblical discipleship problem. You can break everything down to that. Like, yes,
Yeah.
it is a biblical discipleship problem, but like I think it's the identity confusion because he's a very smart and thoughtful guy. And like it took him a very long time to realize like, hey, like some of these pastors and authors and speakers, like this is not a good thing that they're banging the drum of like, be scared of CRT.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. The thing that came to my mind, I heard Russell Berry was on another podcast where he was talking about epistemology, right? And so I think, I think the identity is a piece of it for sure. I think it's kind of the, an overarching piece, discipleship for sure. Right. That's kind of what a lot of people are I think rightfully banging the drum on right now is, a pastor or your small group isn't discipling as much as your news network is or your social media, right? The time, they just don't have time to do it because people are on their news thing or the people around them, are impacting them on a regular basis. But I think part of this identity piece going to the epistemology is that this part of what the identity tells us is that we have everything we need to know from the Bible and from a plain reading, kind of in quotes, a plain reading of the Bible, right? And so if I have a brother or sister tell me this has not been my experience, my experience has been that when I am out, I'm racially profiled. My experience has been that when I get stopped by a police officer, my heart races and I turn the phone on and my mom knows to listen for me, right? My experience has been XYZ. But part of this identity says your experience can't tell me as much as I can learn from the Bible. And I'm not saying that the Bible isn't valuable. And of course, that's not what I'm saying. I'm a seminary student. The Bible's the most valuable text that we have.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is there are other ways to know things about life,
there
right?
are other knowledges in the world. And the Bible actually,
which we actually acknowledge functionally in all the ways that we esteem expertise in fields. Like,
right.
Yeah.
But in part, we see this happening, this identity, though, we see this happening in other areas too, right? So I got the question recently because my husband, who, by the way, I will just say is like he had kind of his like, oh my goodness moment, and he's been devouring, like, you think I'm a reader. He's been devouring stuff like I cannot even tell you, and listening to people's experiences, including mine, and all this kind of stuff. And it's just been great. And he's just been on this path. It's been amazing. Now I forgot where I was going with that, but he's a scientist. He's a PhD level geologist. And so this was a conversation we used to have when we were in college and grad school, is people would always ask him some of these like Museum of the Bible style questions, right? Like, so what happened with Noah's Ark, and kind of things like that. And what do you think about
how did his faith survive learning about science?
Right. Or, what happened, right? And so there's not just this question when it comes to our experiences. Are we believing people whose experiences are different than ours? And is that informing how we view the world? It should. But I think we also see with this identity, there's some of this going on too, right? Where, well, it doesn't say it in the Bible. And so, and I'm kind of being like binary on purpose here, with this
sure.
But well, it doesn't say it in the Bible, so I don't believe in the
current day America has a justice problem.
Right.
So
the Bible,
how can we really know?
Right. Yeah. The Bible doesn't say there's going to be a plague in 2020 and I need to take a vaccine, right? The Bible doesn't address dinosaurs. The Bible doesn't, all of these things. And so we have a problem. And part of the problem with that identity, I think, is that it's like all of us. We all kind of cherry pick the Bible to a degree, if we're honest. But also, I think that same identity that says your experience or your science or whatever it is cannot inform my position actually does, Philip, I think you were going there, actually does let other things inform its position, right? Like politics.
Yeah.
And
stupid partisan talking point machines.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think if we are not being discipled by something like the topic of culture, engaging in culture, if we're not being discipled by our pastors or those who are engaging in that in a healthy way, not in addition to a biblical and healthy way, something's going to fill that spot. It's not that we're not going to get taught. We're either going to get taught well or we're going to get taught poorly. But to Philip's question, you were talking about how do you identify you're in that bubble, and as a Black man who grew up in Black church, come to my church and be at my church for a while and see the poor people who are in our pews and the drunk people who are coming in and screaming at the top of their lungs that they love Jesus even though they are full of alcohol, and see these experiences and have these moments of discipleship. And I think that bubble will at least get some tension on it, because the neighborhood that I grew up in, church culture that I grew up in, the area that I grew up in, it was very different than when I became an adult and then I went into Johnson County in Kansas City. It was super different. And I'm thinking to myself, if we are going to be salt and light, there's not a lot of people here that are, and I don't say this as a pejorative. I don't say that as a pejorative at all. There's not a lot of people who need anything here. There's not a lot of widows. There's not a lot of the downtrodden. It's kind of, there's Teslas in the parking lot, and it's they pretty swanky.
That is really good, Vince. That's
you know what I mean.
Very
and
good.
So it's so nobody needs anything really, and there'll be somebody who needs something. Don't get me wrong, but
it's narrative for the people
COVID hit, and it was like the church had all this fun to everybody wanted to help somebody, and they're like, well, we didn't really have anybody who needed it.
Yeah, everybody was
politically the people who do need it are demonized. So well, they got themselves in that bad position,
right?
So not them.
Well, and we're segregated from them anyway. So
I mean.
So there's just so much opportunity if we are serious, and I think that's the point that I would press to that believer, and having a loving and generous conversation with them is if we're taking our faith serious, then the areas that are disenfranchised, whether you don't boil that person down to statistics that you heard on the news, they're down the street, go talk to them. Yeah. Go be in their company And
Especially,
I think that will
yeah.
really put tension on that bubble. And at the very least, those, like you said, Alexis, those questions, those good questions will start to pop up.
Yeah.
And nobody's going to be confident enough to say, well, are you just morally irreprehensible and are you just super lazy? Nobody's going to say that. And then if you get to know an individual, you'll see there are a lot of very ambitious, a lot of very like hustle type individuals, or just people who are very genuine about their faith and want to do something better, but they are facing all types of opposition. And
Yeah.
they're doing that on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, you
And so
realize that like wealth isn't a moral reward necessarily.
exactly. So all that to say, to test that bubble, just go into those areas that you might drive around or drive through or drive by. There are other faithful Christians, there are other faithful churches, there are other faithful believers who are there. And not saying, you have to go in with a whole bunch of donations. I'll fix it. I'll just give you guys a lot of money. No, it's go do life with them. And you will see how that bubble is probably not the most helpful thing to stay in.
Yeah. I wanted to come back around to as well the point about epistemology and just like, how do we know what we know? And the doctrine of sufficiency, like you're totally right. There's such an unhealthy approach that we take to the doctrine of sufficiency where we
should
use
do
it
a
as the
reflex on
bludgeon
that.
for everything. We kind of have addressed it before.
We definitely
we've
talked about it, but we should do a
We've talked about it
full-on-
on, I think we've talked about topic toss-ups, but yeah, it probably deserves a heavier length. And yeah, I think people get messed up in that in a lot of different spaces. And people fail to realize too, I mean, I've been thinking about this recently, but like churches really don't. Originally, Sunday school, right, at church was like school, like literal, honest to God school. And it's like the church used to know that there's different types of knowledge, right? And I can think of, there's kind of 3 spheres of knowledge that everybody needs, right? Knowledge of God, knowledge of self, and knowledge of the world. And you've got a Christian culture that's almost anemic on all fronts because instead of all of that, it's like just knowledge of this book. But if you really listen to the book, it would give you avenues and the things that you need on all 3. But it's not just by reading it'll give you everything you need for your faith and life and godliness, right? As it says.
Right.
But it's not going to tell you what your personality is. It's not going to tell you the things that you need to work on. It's not going to tell you what passages are exactly, the ones that really you need to pay closer attention to because that's where you tend to struggle. It's not going to tell you what kind of evil that your world is. It's not going to tell you what kind of influences are out there that you have to guard against. It's not going to tell you what sin is being normalized in your life through your culture, through your church, through your family. And so you have to go pursue that work. And the church should be a place, to your point, Alexis, it should be a place that encourages all of those types of knowledge, even if, and especially if if that's inconvenient in the eyes of the state. And too often the church, it seems like, has been just another arm of the state. And this might sound weird, but like even in America, that's been
Very
the
much
case
so.
to just toe the national line of we're the heroes, manifest destiny, and all this stuff. And so then everything that comes with that. Now I think there are other people in the faith who in America who don't have that experience, to Vince's point. But then we just have this really convenient tool of, well, they don't actually have the gospel.
Yeah, we marginalize and keep our bubble nice and tight. Like they're out.
Yeah.
Oof.
Man, well, that's an area to end it for sure.
Gotta be back. This is good, man.
Yeah, this was awesome. Alexis, before we go, because we're coming in on an hour already, one thing we always like to do with our guests is substance shout outs. This is just a time for you to share with the audience anything that you've been reading, any podcasts you've been listening to, music, books, anything that you've been consuming that has been just edifying and beneficial for you lately.
Okay. So before you said edifying, I thought I had it.
Or just fun.
But
Or fun.
But I'm like, can I just be a dork right now and tell you guys
Do
like
it.
really like
Please
totally
do.
what I'm into right now?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll say this first. No spoilers from anybody. If you guys have finished the series, and if you did, you probably finished it 3 years ago. So stop, because I don't want to hear any. I don't want to
Okay.
hear
Oh,
any
I thought you were
spoilers.
going to go Ted Lasso.
Yeah. I was like,
We don't have Apple TV. I just today I was on the phone with someone and she
2
was talking about
seasons
it.
are
Like,
done in their half hour. Sign up for your free week and crank it
I
out.
know I need to do
there
it.
you go. It's only like $5 a month.
So it's not Ted Lasso for me. It's Madam Secretary. Like
Okay.
Oh,
Netflix, right?
All right.
So
Okay.
what's her name? Tia Leone or something like this. So what I like about it, can I nerd for a second and say what I
Please
really
do.
like
Yeah,
about it,
of
right? So
course.
this is the series where she's a professor and she comes in to serve as Secretary of State.
Okay.
So I'm in like the 5th season or something right now. I think it only has 6 seasons. And I've been watching it for a while. And what is interesting to me is there have been several social issues that are brought up on the show, some longer term, that span, several episodes or a season, and some that are just shorter, maybe 1 or 2 episodes. But I go back, like I find myself going back and figuring out when did they originally air, right? Because this was on a network, right? This is not a Netflix show. This was on a network where it aired weekly on an actual like schedule. And so I find myself going back, and I've told my husband multiple times, I don't think they're prophetic, but I do think they were perceptive.
Mm-hmm.
So they're
Interesting.
addressing stuff, of course, now it's all like most of it is past, but I will give you an example of one of the short-term ones. They had an entire episode where they kind of did a PSA at the end. It's not normally like that. They don't normally do PSAs, but they had an entire episode where there was a measles outbreak. And it was like, these developed countries, right? So the United States and Australia and, are all like blaming migrants for the outbreak, right? And it's like this smoke screen. They're blaming climate migrants, right? That's part of the other underlying thing is these people are migrating because their places of their homes are being destroyed by global warming, which, part of the political stuff here, they don't believe it's a real thing. And so they are migrating and they're being blamed for this measles outbreak. But really what it was one of a citizen from one of the developed countries had been a tourist at another one. And then both of them had like pretty serious misinformation about vaccines. And so they had a significant unvaccinated population and it became an outbreak,
man.
and especially affecting children, right, who were not vaccinated, didn't have their MMR or whatever. And I'm like, whoa, like, and so that was another one. I'm like, when did this air? Like,
Yeah.
they didn't put this out in October of 2020, right? This was like, anyway, it's been a few years. So anyway, if that's like, too weirdo political, you can totally edit part of that out. But
No, not at
No,
all.
I've heard about that
MSEC.
show. I've never checked it out. That sounds interesting.
That's one of my favorites right now is Madam Secretary. And then kind of dorky again, I'm reading some stuff for school that's kind of like blowing my mind. So I mentioned immigration earlier. One of the books I'm reading is called Welcoming the Stranger.
Okay.
And this book is on immigration and really gives a pretty informed, I feel like a nuanced perspective, but it's not an academic book. It's kind of a book for churches. And then let me see. I was going to nerd out again, but I'm not. I'm not going to do it. I'll say this. This is one of the two of the ones that have really gotten me is The Porter's Gate.
Oh, yeah.
So I am like, it depends on how I feel. I'm either on repeat with Justice songs or I'm on repeat with Lament songs. So those 2 albums.
Yeah, super good.
We got to have them on. I connected with them after Justice songs came out.
Did
and they
you?
said, yeah, we're down to do it. And they've been busy. We've been busy. So
oh my goodness.
follow
Yeah,
back up with them.
I've got like one of the guys, we're like mutually follow one another on Instagram, and I keep like waiting to reach out, and I just haven't done it yet. I think I'm a little bit nervous. Like, what would I say?
Well, Advent Songs is coming out in a month or 2, so maybe that would be a good setup.
I think I saw that just today. Yeah, no joke. That would be, yeah.
I know we're running the time here, but also you said you're a huge podcast fan. Would love to hear a couple of podcast shout outs, whether for fun or for faith or for your hobbies, or what do you like? What are some great podcasts?
Okay. So if I need to catch up quick, I feel like The Daily is kind of my go-to. I love Church Politics podcast with Justin Giboney. We've mentioned him.
Mhm.
And then, yeah, I've been listening to a lot of Holy Posts lately.
Nice.
They've had some
too.
pretty
I
fire
kind
stuff
of,
on.
I don't know if you guys are this way, but I kind of end up finding myself where I kind of rotate. Like I'll be like really into a show for a little while, and then it'll get kind of on the back burner. And I'll go and be like really into another show for a little while, and then
Mhm.
yeah. So I'm catching myself. I'm like, I don't know, is Holy Post my show right now? It might be, but
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
good one.
Our friend Caitlin is now like a
Regular contributor.
associate host.
she
Yeah.
is. Yeah. I mean, sometimes I skip through like news of the butt. If I'm honest, I'm like,
Hilarious.
it's just
I love Caitlin's uncomfortability with it.
It's pretty funny.
yes.
Did you see? Have you seen Russell Moore's new podcast?
I
He,
haven't.
yes.
I've seen some of the
Signposts,
hype. Yeah.
and then like revamped it and basically relaunched it.
He freaking got Marilyn Robinson on his show, and I was very jealous.
And he's got well, it's like Phil, it's like brand new even since that.
Well, then maybe it's his last one then.
Yeah, because he signed on with Christianity Today, and so now he has like all their
Yes.
production stuff and like
Ooh, very nice.
his latest episode, David French and I have our first argument. Was
Gotta get
So-
him on the show.
very fun.
More
Man.
David French.
Yeah.
He's
I mean,
everywhere.
I guess I don't know. Is David? We just somebody shout out to David French, right? Maybe
There
he's
you
the
Shout
go.
out David French.
Shout out to David French.
French Friday.
But yeah, I've been loving Russell Moore's energy recently ever since he left the SBCs.
Word.
Been like popping off.
Man.
Hey, that's Substance 2.0, right? Dude?
I can't keep up. Sometimes I like to just, if I don't have time to listen to podcasts, I enjoy seeing what people are tweeting about.
Yeah.
On,
Trev, you can feel free to cut this. I'll also give you a big compliment on just the production. I don't know if it's you or Seth. Your show is one that I like. I don't listen to it like every week when it comes out, but I'll listen to all the ones that I'm interested in. I'll go back and listen to chunks. You've definitely gotten me with some of the ones that I wasn't necessarily like putting on my queue with your audiograms. Like you pick really great ones and then you tweet them out or have them in your stories. Like, okay, like that one's going in the queue. Like I think the audiograms are great.
Thank you. Is that the word? Is that what we call them? I don't even know what they're called. Audiograms. Nice. Thank you. I don't communicate
That's
that very well
definitely
with my
caused me
guests,
to
but-
download some of your shows from like I don't recognize that person, and I've got 200 podcasts to listen to right now.
Right.
But-
No, that's totally Seth. That is 100% Seth, because when he comes in, like I don't listen to them again most of the time, unless it's like a friend. I don't
You're
listen
a pro.
to them
You're like,
again.
I'm recording and done.
Because I have a pro who does all that for me, right? Or sometimes I'll come back and I'll be like, wait, you were supposed to edit this, so sometimes I do have to do that. Or when I go back and do the show notes, I want to make sure I got everything. But Seth listens to it, and I think that's probably why they're so good, Philip, is because he comes in with a fresh ear, right? Like most of the time he has not read the book. He obviously has not had that conversation. He's coming in just completely a blank slate. And so it really is just like whatever sticks out to him. And so
It's
we've
like, that's a
kept
great
that.
little 45 second. I mean,
Yeah.
it's happened 3 or 4 times in the
Yeah.
last few months where I'm like, ooh, like, because you put them on your Instagram stories. It's like, that was good. I'm adding that to the list.
Oh, thanks, Philip. He'll love to hear that. Yeah, but I think it works because, like I said, he's coming into it with no preconceived notions, right? And so it just is kind of whatever catches his ear. And he'll usually jot down 3 or 4 and then come up with what he thinks might be the best one. So that's awesome.
I love it.
Nice. Gonna go ahead and add that makes total sense to my subscribe list there.
Oh, you guys are awesome.
Gotta jump on that. Some good stuff. Well, Alexis, thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, people can find you on That Makes Total Sense on, I'm guessing what, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, everywhere you get podcasts, etc.
You named it.
And then where would you have people find you on socials or anything like that if they wanted to follow you or tweet at you or whatever?
Yeah. So, man, when I am not bombarded with studying, then sometimes I hang out on Instagram, which is where we got connected. Philip and I got connected, and that the best one is probably at Alexis Busetti. No underscores, dots, or anything like that, and that will also take you to at TMTS podcast. On all of those, my handles are the same everywhere.
Boom.
Awesome.
There you go.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much for the great conversation. Thank you for your show and the time and just spending some time this evening with us.
Oh my goodness. Thank you guys so much. It was a total blast. I'm super, super glad you guys asked. Thanks.
All right. Have a good night. Well, that was a great conversation, a fun podcast with Alexis from the That Makes Total Sense podcast.
That makes total sense.
It made total sense
It's
to
got
have
an
her on
exclamation
tonight.
point on it.
It really did.
And have this great conversation. We hope you check out her podcast. And if you're checking us out from her podcast, we were glad to have you stopping by. While you're stopping by, my friend Philip's got some stuff to say to you.
Okay. Well, as you guys know, Vince might talk about it in a second here. We're not working on a script, but the website is out. Seeing some of you guys,
Get on it.
substancepod.com. And the substancepod.com is brought to you by you guys.
Yes.
The folks who are signed up on Anchor for our monthly support, the $5 and $10 a month folks, you are the ones helping us grow. We got the website up and running. So listen to this episode with Alexis. Great episode. Go to thesubstancepod.com. Leave your thoughts in a comment. You can make a little profile, you put your name and email in there so people can see it's you. Let us know what you think. We're hoping that the website is we have a really good following on Instagram and Twitter, and they're kind of different. We're hoping that the website can kind of be a centralized place to where the Substance listeners can kind of come together and dialogue and create new content for some of our topic toss-ups, but really hopefully build the community of the Substance listeners. We don't have a cute name for our listeners yet. Maybe we're not quite at that level of
I think once the listeners get on the substancepod.com and start interacting, that eventually the community name will appear for them. It'll just become evident.
So go to thesubstancepod.com, brought to you by you. If you enjoy the show, if it brings value to you, if it is something, put out 4 or 5 of these a month, depending on the month. If that's worth $5-10 a month, we ask you to join us there in our Anchor link in the show notes. Or if you monthly support, not really your style, but you want to throw us some bucks here and there, you can do that on Cash App at $thesubstancepod. And if Cash App is not your app of choice, you can just sign up on Cash App using our code, and it just gives us $5 just for you signing up. So that's a free way to give us $5. We haven't mentioned that in a while.
And if enough people chip in to join up as financial partners of the Substance, maybe we can afford to give Vince an actual raise at some point.
No, that's not a priority, but I appreciate you thinking about me.
We do want to get the merch train rolling. We got a great Vince and my wife Anna. Shout out to Anna Marinello. They got some great designs up there, so we got some good ideas for merch. Get a couple more supporters there, and there might be Substance merch in the future. So check that out if that is something you're into.
Yeah, and just like Phil said, thesubstancepod.com is live. So go visit our website, and there you can get our links in the upper right corner of the screen. It has all of our links to the to Facebook, to Instagram, and to Twitter. Obviously, those handles are The Substance Pod. And the reason why it's important to be on our socials is, one, for our giveaways. We have had some fantastic giveaways that we love for you to be a part of. And that's where we love to interact with you as well. If you find yourself not commenting on the actual website, definitely comment in our comment section on our socials, and we'd love to interact with you in that way. You're going to be able to find our guests that we've had or that we will have, and it's just a great way to know what we're doing and what we're getting up to. So follow us on the socials.
thesubstancepod.com. Man, it's thesubstancepod.com. Check that out. But after you're done checking that out, if you're still old school and want to send us a nice long email, you can do so at thesubstancepod@gmail.com. Or
if you're on the website on your phone.
Or if you're on your phone.
Our phone number's on the website.
You're on
Give
your
us
phone.
a call.
You just you're of the generation now that nobody calls anybody. You know, it's like, what is even, my phone makes phone calls? You might have forgotten about that. But if you just remembered because I reminded you, you can go ahead and pull up that app. It's probably hidden somewhere on your phone, the phone app, with the dial pad, and hit these numbers: 913-703-3883. Punch the call button. Let us know your thoughts, your testimonials, your experiences with the show, with life, with whatever. And if it's good stuff, we'll put it on the show. So hit us up. Thank you for listening. We enjoy being here with you guys. We enjoy bringing these conversations to you. We enjoy your interactions on thesubstancepod.com. And we will see you next week
on The Substance.
Peace.
Do. All right. Excelente. All right.
I thought that was going to be your transition, saying excelente.
Excelente.
Excelente. That was Alexis.
No.
Excelente.
This is an Excelente podcast.
Little Danny Rojas there.
That was a really dope podcast.
Podcast is life.
Podcast. Yes.
I wish we could get Andre 3000 on here.
I wish.
Why not?
Well, yeah, man. Let's do it.
Kanye got him and then dumped him like an idiot. So
what? Anyway.
Trev.
Here we go.
Excelente.